Hi everyone. Today we are going to talk about 12.8b confidence of interval for proportions. So we are going to compute the margin of error by identifying sample size and create a confidence interval by using the sample proportion and sample size. So last time we learned how to get the confidence interval. So what is confidence interval? It refers to the probability that a population parameter will fall between a set of values for a certain proportion of times. So confidence intervals measure the degree of uncertainty or certainty in a sampling method, right? And they can take any number of probability limits, with the most common being a 95% or 99% confidence level. So confidence interval is a range or interval of values used to estimate the true value of a population parameter. So what is it? X bar is the sample mean, right? The mean, average of the sample, minus margin of error. That's the lower bound. And then upper bound is mean plus margin of error. So we should know the margin of error. How do you get the margin of error? 2 times of standard deviation for 95%. Well, first, one standard deviation is 68%, right? So that's the way we get the margin of error, and you subtract from the mean, sample mean, and then for upper bound, you add the margin of error to the sample mean. So you have a sample mean is here, 2 standard deviation to the left, 2 standard deviation to the right. That will be the confidence interval. Let's get this with the example. But today we are doing, we are going to get the confidence interval when you get the proportion. All right? When you know the probability, not the actual data. All right? So how do you get the standard deviation? When you know the probability instead of sample mean or actual data? So probability is the mean that time, right? So P is the probability or mean, the average proportion. So P times 1 minus P and divided by sample size, and then you put the square root. That will be the standard deviation formula. So margin of error for 95%, the confidence is 2 times standard deviation. So confidence of interval will be sample mean minus MOE, margin of error, sample mean plus margin of error. So simple, right? So now how do you get it? With example now. So let's see the question problem. A survey was given to a random sample of 1750 voters. So N is a 1750 sample size, right? The sample of 1750 voters. As to ask about their preference for the presidential candidate. Of those surveyed, 28% of the people said they preferred 28%. That's the proportion we get, right? Of the 1750, 28%. That's the P. And that's the mean proportion, sample mean or proportion, right? So, but determine a 95% confidence interval for the percentage of people who prefer candidate A, rounding values to the nearest 10th. Now, 95% confidence interval, just you remember the formula, right? The interval is mean minus MOE, mean plus MOE, margin of error. So you know the mean is 28%. And how do you find out the margin of error? 2 standard deviation. That's it. So you need to remember 2 things, mean and how do you get the standard deviation? And done, right? So let's get it. So but let's get the margin of error first. 2 standard deviation. How do you get it? 2 times, because now 2 times standard deviation is square root p times 1 minus p divided by n. So what is p? 0.28, right? So you plug it in here. And n was sample size 1750. If you put this in the calculator, be careful. If you do it properly in the calculator, you will get 0.021. How many percent is it? Is it 21%? No, right? 0.02 is 2%. So this is 2.1%. You move the decimal 2 times. Then 2.1%, right? Now let's get the interval. The nearest 10th percent. 2.1%. So confidence of interval, you know, mean minus MOE, we already get the MOE. So mean is 28%. So 28% minus 2.1%. 28% plus 2.1%. So, and then your result is like this, 25.9%, 30.1% is the interval. Very good. Let's see with one more example with the dividing rows. So now everything same. A survey was given, sample 130, to determine whether they support a new plan to raise taxes in order to increase education spending. Of those surveyed, 50% of the people said they were in favor of the plan. What is the probability proportion? 50%, 0.5, right? So determine 95% confidence interval for the percentage of people who favor in the tax plan. Nearest 10th. So what is P? What is N? Then you know how to get the standard deviation, right? And margin of error, and then you get the confidence interval in that order. So if you put it, 0.5 is the 50%, and then 130 is the sample size. How do you get the sample size? I mean standard deviation. You put it into the calculator, and the formula p times 1 minus p divided by n in the square root will be standard deviation. If you do it, so what do you get? Margin of error is 2 standard deviation. But if you get the standard deviation 0.04, and then you put into the 2 standard deviation is 0.08, right? 4% will be 8%. Then what is that? Confidence interval. How do you get the 42%? 50% minus 8%, 50% plus 8%. That is the confidence interval. All right, let's stop here.